Hello everyone and welcome to the Sky This Month for August 2024. My name's Paul Martinaitis and this show is brought to you by the Astronomical Society of South Australia. So it's a nice time of year to be observing. The nights are starting to get a little bit warmer and hopefully they'll be more cloud free, which would be nice. So there's a little bit of action starting to happen with the planets. This month we've got Venus in the evening sky. Saturn is also rising a little bit later on in the evening, and that will be coming to opposition next month in September. And also in the early hours we've got Jupiter and Mars as well. So we'll begin as usual by doing a tour of the night sky for August. So I'll begin our sky tour in the west, and we're looking as the sky will appear on the 24th of August, which is the beginning of the next dark sky period, where the moon won't be interfering. So on the 24th of August, it will rise, the moon will rise at about 11:30 p.m. in the evening. So until then, the sky should be nice and dark. And of course, as the days go on from the 24th, the moon will start rising later and later, and you'll be able to observe well past midnight. So as we can see, Virgo is now half set below the horizon. So really a lot of the fine galaxies in this region of the sky are now getting really either below the horizon or fairly close to the horizon. So might be your last chance to glimpse some of the higher ones. In particular M83, which is of course part of Hydra. That's still at about 30 degrees above the horizon, so not optimal. But if you happen to be out there and you're viewing particularly a little bit earlier in the evening, might be your last chance to see M83 for a while. Of course, that's compensated on the other hand with these galaxies disappearing because in the eastern part of the sky, as the year rolls on, constellations such as Fornax and Sculptor will be rising higher and higher. And of course, there's a lot of great galaxies in that region of the sky as well. Looking a little bit further up, Centaurus and the Southern Cross are still reasonably high up and good for observation. And looking higher up still, Scorpius is up near the zenith, so really as good as it gets for viewing Scorpius. And also the same goes for Sagittarius as well, which is now right up at the zenith of the sky. So Scorpius was the constellation of the month for July. Unfortunately, we had a few problems getting the July video out, so you may not have seen it. It should now be currently on the YouTube channel, however. So if you didn't get to see it and you're interested in viewing Scorpius, I invite you to take a look just at the constellation of the month section for July, where I go through several of the fine deep sky objects in Scorpius, including the globular cluster M4 near Antares, the Cat's Paw Nebula, which is around here, a bit of a challenge object, as well as some open clusters. Moving on to, while we're in this region of the sky, we might as well talk about Sagittarius. And there's many lovely objects in this part of the sky. Of course, some of the greatest emission nebula that can be found anywhere. Many of them you'll be familiar with, but I'll just quickly go through them to remind you of how to find them. So Sagittarius, the most prominent part is this so-called teapot asterism, which is shown to you at the moment upside down. So here we have this distorted rectangle of stars, which are the body of the teapot. We have the handle. We have this triangle here, which is the spout. And if you like, that's the steam coming out the spout. And then we have this triangle here, which is kind of like the lid. So if you take a look at this star here, Gamma, which is the top of the lid, follow it along to this star here, which is, I think, Mu Sagittarius. And then that can be our launch point for finding these nebula. So using Mu as a jumping off point, if we go slightly in this direction towards the left and up, we'll find the Lagoon Nebula. So that's about 4 degrees away from Mu. And I happen to be fiddling around with a video camera, which I normally use for planetary imaging the other day. And I managed to capture this picture of the lagoon from my backyard. It's certainly not a great photograph. It's not going to win any prizes. But I kind of like this sort of photo because it kind of represents, gives you a good impression of what you can see through the eyepiece. The background would normally be darker, of course. This background's mainly a result because I took it from a very light polluted sky, but most of this detail is visible through, say, a 6 to 8 inch telescope or larger, particularly if you use a nebula filter. The only difference is it'll be in monochrome. You won't see that pink color generally. So you'll see these stars, quite a few stars embedded within the cluster. You can see this dark channel cutting through it, which is the lagoon. And you can also, these sort of dark streaks that you can kind of see throughout the cloud, you can also see them on a nice transparent night as well. And to me, this nebula always looks a bit like a monster, a lagoon monster, because you've got the two bright eyes here, and then you've got this dark channel which kind of looks like this sinister grin sort of reaching out to you from the darkness. So that's always a great nebula to take a look at. And then just slightly below it, probably, so there's the lagoon, probably about 2 degrees, 1 or 2 degrees below it is the Trifid Nebula. So the Trifid Nebula is much smaller. And again, so you need to use, generally that'll be a telescope object. You won't see much of it through binoculars, maybe just a little fuzzy patch. So through a telescope, you need to use a bit more magnification than you would on the lagoon. And it's a little bit fainter, so generally to get the best view, I would definitely recommend an O3 filter. And again, this photo that I took, if you think of that as being in monochrome, represents much of the detail that you can see through an eyepiece on a good night. In fact, through a telescope on a good night, you'd probably see even more detail than this. So you can see that there's a little star cluster in the middle of the nebula, quite a few doubles in fact. And then you can see these channels. So 2 of the channels are quite prominent, and then the other 2 are less prominent. So you can always generally see 3. Sometimes the 4th one here is a little bit difficult to discern. And again, this nebula responds very strongly to an O3 filter. So moving back to mu. If we now go down this way in this direction, again about 2 degrees, we come across the M24 star cloud. So when we're looking at this object, what you'll see is lots of stars in the background anyway, and the star cloud will appear as this misty sort of almost partially resolved section of the Milky Way. So what you're actually looking at when we look at the normal Milky Way is the arm that our own sun is in. When we're looking at the star cloud, we're actually looking through a gap in our arm to the next arm in on the Milky Way spiral called the Norma arm. So that's why these stars appear as a uniform glow, with some of them resolving because they're much further away in the next spiral arm. And when you're looking at this section too, particularly if you're looking with binoculars or a wide field in your telescope, keep a lookout for these dark patches here. So these dark patches aren't a void in the cloud itself. They're actually dark nebula. So they're clouds of dark gas, dark molecular clouds, cold gas and dust, which are actually foreground objects. They're in front of the star cloud, and that's why they appear like a void. So just coming on back out again, and then if we move, I'll switch the stars back on. If we move down again, so again there's mu. If we now move down to this point here in a straight line, we come across the Omega Nebula, or the Swan Nebula, one of the brightest emission nebula in the sky. So you can see here, there's the shape of the swan. This section here you can generally only see through a large telescope and an O3 filter, but this inner part is apparent in any sort of telescope. Very, very bright, and responds extremely strongly. So once you slip a O3 filter in, the shape really becomes apparent. And because of its high surface brightness, you can also afford to use plenty of magnification. Looking directly north now, we can see that there's a string of great constellations, unfortunately getting quite low now. So your last chance to catch, there's Arcturus in Boots. To the right we have Corona Borealis, or the Northern Crown, that lovely arc of relatively faint stars that form the crown. Hercules, which is kind of to me like a mini Orion. Again, one of the few constellations that kind of actually looks what it represents. And of course, one of the best objects in Hercules is the famous M13 globular. So while you're in that vicinity, you can take a look at that in binoculars, or even better, some sort of telescope. Along further right again, we have Lyra. And of course, there's quite a few nice objects in Lyra, including some lovely double stars, but the jewel in Lyra is the Ring Nebula. And it's one of the best planetary nebula to show that ring shape, and in addition is extremely easy to find. So to find it, there's the brightest star Vega. Up there we see this parallelogram of stars, and halfway across the top parallelogram, or maybe a third of the way from the left star, you'll find M57. So that I'll have to just magnify that a bit. So that's better. So that shows a really distinct ring shape in any sort of telescope, and it has a very high surface brightness as well. So again, you can crank up the magnification. And like all planetary nebula, O3 filter does help, but this one is actually so bright that sometimes the view without a filter might be better. It's readily apparent, even just with normal without a filter. So looking eastward now, we can see there's only really two naked eye planets available in the evening sky at the moment. Venus in the early evening, and Saturn. So Saturn, I think, is rising at this time of month at about 7:30 or so. So by 8:30, it's a reasonable way above the horizon if you want to take a look at Saturn. And of course, it'll get higher as the evening progresses, and it will be moving into opposition in September. So it's in Aquarius at the moment. So we've got Aquarius, Capricorn, and what we've lost in the Virgo going down, the galaxies we're losing in Virgo, of course we're gaining in this region of the sky. So towards the southeast we have Sculptor, which has of course galaxies such as NGC 55 and the great galaxy NGC 253, sometimes known as the Silver Coin Galaxy. We also have Grus, the Crane, which is quite well placed for observation at the moment, which also contains, of course, the famous Grus Quartet. We'll now take a look at the lunar calendar for August. So on the 1st of August, nights are starting to get a little bit shorter now. So on the 1st of August, darkness began at a little bit, about 3 minutes past 7, and went through to 5:41 in the morning. By the end of August, true darkness will begin at 19:20 or 20 past 7 and go through to 5:12 in the morning. So the dark period where the moon won't interfere with our observations, that'll begin on around the 24th of August, where the moon will be setting at about 11:30 p.m. in the evening. And the dark period will go through to about the rest of August and into about the 5th of September. Maybe a little bit longer, depending on how late you want to start observing. So the moon phases are: new moon was on the 4th, first quarter is on the 13th, full moon will be on the 20th, and last quarter will be on the 26th. So looking at the solar system now, and we'll begin with the interior planets, Mercury and Venus. So we can see at the beginning of August, Mercury was very close to the sun from our perspective in the evening sky. And then as August progresses, it moves in conjunction with the sun, between us and the sun, and it will then emerge late August and through into September as a morning object. So pretty much for the entirety of August, Mercury is unobservable. Venus, on the other hand, if we just move back to around the 20th of August, the apparent distance of Venus from the sun is reasonably large. So Venus will be a lovely evening object throughout August, and it's going to remain an evening object pretty much through until March of 2025, because it'll take that long for Venus to catch us in our orbit to get ahead again. Looking now to the outer planets. So firstly, let's start with Mars and Jupiter. So you can see the way the orbits are aligned at the moment. They're relatively close to each other from our point of view. They're kind of almost lined up. So Jupiter and Mars will spend most of all of August relatively close together in the sky, within about 5 degrees of each other or so. And they'll also be joined by the Moon later in orbit, later in August, when the Moon swings around to join them in the sky as well. Looking further out still, and by the way, to observe Jupiter and Mars, they will be an early morning object. So you'll want to view these in the couple of hours before sunrise. Moving now, swinging around to take a look at Saturn and Neptune. We can see that we're almost at opposition with Saturn. So opposition will occur next month in September. So opposition is where the Saturn and the Earth and the Sun are all in line with the Sun behind us. So that means not only will Saturn be at its brightest, but also it means we'll be closest to it for this orbital cycle. So therefore, it'll have a very large apparent diameter. So this month, next month in opposition and through into October will be fantastic times to view Saturn. So I think at the moment Saturn's rising at about 7:30 in the evening, and it's transiting after midnight, about 1:30 a.m. I think. So as the months progress, it'll start transiting in the hours before midnight. Also next month as well, one of my favourite planets, Neptune, will also come into opposition in September. So that's also something to look forward to as well. So we'll now take a look at some of the planetary views. So as we saw, Venus is currently an evening object and will remain so until around March 2025. So this shows you the view you could expect towards the end of the month on the 20th of August at around 6:30 in the evening. So to view Venus at the moment, you'll need to just view it just as the sun's gone down in the twilight hours. But you can't miss it. It'll be an extremely bright object, brighter than any other object in the sky, except for the sun and the moon, perhaps. Also on this diagram, the left-hand arrow shows you the current position on the 20th of comet Tsuchinshan, which we've talked about in the May show. So hopefully you got a chance to have a bit of a preview of Tsuchinshan when it was nice and high through a telescope in the night sky. As it's approaching the sun, it's now starting to get lost in the evening twilight, and it's still currently only about magnitude 8 or so, not much brighter than that. So it'll be a very challenging observation, given that the sky is still bright in twilight. So it'll reach conjunction, so it'll get closer and closer to the sun being lost in twilight, and its closest approach to the sun will occur on the 9th of October. So all being well, if it doesn't disintegrate or break up, it will re-emerge, and in mid to later October, hopefully it'll emerge as a very bright, possibly up to magnitude 4 comet. So we'll just have to wait until October and keep our fingers crossed. Now we're looking at the view on the 20th of August. So this, on the other hand, is 9:30 in the evening, and just shows you roughly where Saturn's hanging out at the moment. So on the 20th, the moon will also be quite near it, full moon, so won't be much good for observing anything else except the moon and Saturn on that night. So Saturn is in Aquarius at the moment, and about the same distance, a little bit longer down on the bottom arrow, you can see the position of Neptune. Still rather low in the sky at the moment, but at this time. So next month in September, we'll talk a little bit more about Neptune as it's reaching opposition and how to find it. Finally, we're now looking early in the morning, sort of in the pre-dawn hours. So this shows you the situation still on the 20th at around 4:30 a.m. And we can see Jupiter and Mars are quite near each other in the sky. Mars, we're still too far away, so I think that's reaching opposition, I think, in January of 2025 or thereabouts. At the moment, we're still too far away from Mars to see any surface features, really, certainly visually through a telescope. Jupiter, of course, reaches opposition, which is reaching opposition in December, is already very large and bright. So by all means, take a look at it through binoculars and your telescope if you have them out at that time. And the other interesting thing is it'll make a nice contrast. There's actually quite a few red objects around. So you can see here, and bright as well. So we have Mars on the lower arrow, Jupiter, and then in Taurus, above them, you can see there's Alpha Taurus or Aldebaran. And then across to the right, we have Betelgeuse as well. So that should make a lovely sight in the pre-dawn hours. Thank you very much for joining me in today's show. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. And you're able to get out now that the evenings are perhaps getting a little bit warmer and hopefully less cloudy. You can get out and do some great observations. So until then, clear skies, and I look forward to seeing you in the September show. So bye for now.